There's a pattern I've seen in people who consistently win. Not just once, not just when things are easy, but over and over again through storms and setbacks. These people don't just work hard, they don't just talk confidently, they think differently. And the difference begins with one simple but powerful idea. They start with why. I remember meeting a woman named Sarah who ran a small community school in a low-income neighborhood. On paper, she wasn't what most people would call a winner. She didn't make a lot of money, she didn't have fancy degrees, her school didn't have the best test scores. But what I noticed, what struck me was how she spoke about her work. She didn't say, we teach kids math and reading. She said, we're here to break the cycle. We're here to give kids a sense of possibility. That's a very different conversation. That's the language of someone who starts with why. Most people, when asked what they do, start with the what. I'm a teacher, I'm an engineer, I'm a business owner. Some might go a level deeper and explain how they do it. I use creative methods to teach. I build efficient systems. But winners, real winners, begin with purpose. They begin with why they do what they do. Their sense of identity and mission is so clear, it shapes not just their words, but their action. It shapes their decision-making. It anchors them in storms and elevates them in still waters. When you think like a winner, your mind isn't just focused on outcomes, it's focused on meaning. Your thinking shifts from what can I get to what difference can I make. And that shift changes everything. Because when you start with why, you're no longer just working for results, you're building something that matters. You're not just chasing success, you're moving with intention. I once worked with a startup founder who had 2 failed companies behind him. At first glance, you'd think he just didn't have what it takes. But the 3rd company, it took off like wildfire. I asked him what changed. He said, the first 2 times I was trying to prove something. I wanted to look successful. This time, I just wanted to solve a problem I truly cared about. He started with why. And that's when everything clicked. His team followed, not because of his resume, but because of his belief. Investors came on board not because of his pitch, but because of his purpose. That's what winners do. They lead with belief, not ego. And here's something important. When you start with why, your language changes. You no longer say, I have to. You say, I get to. You stop talking about deadlines and start talking about impact. You don't say, this is hard. You say, this is worth it. The tone of your life shifts from obligation to opportunity. And people feel it. People are drawn to it. Think about the greatest leaders in history, whether in business, social change, sports, or the arts. Their speeches weren't filled with technical jargon. They didn't win people over with data alone. They spoke about beliefs, hopes, and dreams. They knew their why, and they let that guide their words. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't say, I have a 10-point plan. He said, I have a dream. That's the voice of purpose. That's the sound of someone thinking and talking like a winner. Now here's the hard part. Starting with why doesn't always give you fast results. It doesn't guarantee instant success. In fact, it often takes longer because it forces you to build deep rather than just high. But the results are lasting. When you think and speak from purpose, you build trust, you build connection, you build resilience. And it's not just about external communication, it's about internal dialogue too. Winners don't just speak their why to others. They remind themselves of it constantly. In moments of doubt, they go back to their reason. In moments of failure, they ask, what's the purpose behind this? And because of that, they don't crumble when things go wrong. They recalibrate, they realign, they return to their why and find strength. It's not magic, it's mindset. Every person has the ability to think and talk like a winner. You don't need a title or a trophy. You need clarity, you need conviction, and you need courage. The courage to speak from the inside out, not the outside in. That's how trust is built. That's how movements start. That's how ideas become reality. So if you want to become the kind of person people follow, the kind of person who keeps showing up even when it's hard, start by answering one question. Why do I do what I do? Not what you do, not how you do it. Why? Because if you know your why, the what becomes more powerful The how becomes more creative, and the way you show up in the world becomes more authentic. That's how winners think, that's how winners speak, and that's how they lead, not from position, but from purpose. There's a difference between people who have goals and people who have vision. Goals are useful, they give direction, they measure progress, they create momentum. But goals on their own are not enough. Goals alone don't move people. Goals don't inspire. Vision does. When you listen to someone who truly thinks and talks like a winner, you'll notice they rarely talk in bullet points or checklists. They speak in possibility. They describe the future as if it already exists, not because they're delusional, but because they believe in something bigger than the next milestone. They don't just want to win the game, they want to change how the game is played. I once sat across the table from a young leader named Daniel, who was preparing to pitch his new business. He had rehearsed all the facts, his revenue targets, market share projections, cost structure, and product features. Technically, his pitch was flawless. But something was missing. I asked him, "What's your vision?" He looked puzzled. "I just told you. I want to reach 1 million users in 2 years." I nodded. "That's a goal, but what do you see? What's the world going to look like if you succeed?" He paused, then smiled as the answer came out slowly with warmth in his voice. "I want to make financial education so accessible that kids from every neighborhood, even the forgotten ones, grow up understanding money better than most adults do today." That was it. That was the shift. That's when his message began to connect, not with the mind, but with the heart. When you think like a winner, you realize that goals exist inside vision. Vision is the container, the foundation, the reason behind the target. Goals are numbers, vision is narrative. You hit a goal, you move on. But when you're driven by a vision, every goal becomes part of a bigger mission. That's what gives your words power. That's what makes people want to follow you, not just fund you or hire you. We've all heard people talk about what they want to achieve. I want to earn 6 figures. I want to finish this project. I want to be promoted. But these statements are only compelling when they're anchored to something larger. Without vision, goals sound hollow. With vision, goals feel necessary. There's a sense of urgency, but also a sense of purpose. Think about a sports team at the start of a season. Every team wants to win the championship. That's the goal. But the best teams, the most resilient ones, the ones that perform under pressure, are the ones that have something deeper binding them together. They're not just chasing a trophy. They're playing for something more. A sense of pride, a chance to prove something, a legacy. That's vision. And when the vision is clear, even the players on the bench feel like they matter. Even the hard days feel worth it. Winners don't just talk about what they want, they talk about what they see. They speak of the future as if it's pulling them forward. They don't need to fake motivation because their vision gives them fuel. They wake up with intention, not just ambition. Their words aren't coated in pressure. They're infused with possibility. One of the most striking examples I've ever seen came from a woman named Lila, who ran a social enterprise focused on clean water access. She stood in front of a room of skeptical investors. Not an easy room. She didn't start with statistics or slides. She told a story about a child in a rural village who had to walk 4 miles every day for a bucket of water. Then she said, "My vision is simple. One day, that child walks out their front door and water is already there. And that changes everything." The room leaned in. That's what vision does. It draws people into a world that doesn't exist yet and invites them to help build it. Vision also gives you resilience. When the inevitable setbacks come, and they always do, people who think and talk like winners don't fold. Why? Because their eyes are fixed on something that hasn't happened yet. They understand that obstacles are just steps along the way. When others give up, they keep going, not because they're stubborn, but because the picture in their mind is too vivid to let go of. And here's something subtle but powerful. When you talk with vision, people start to see themselves in your story. You're no longer just saying what you want, you're showing them how they belong in it. That's when leadership starts to happen. That's when communities form. That's when people begin to care, not just about your work, but about the world you're trying to shape. Winners don't just set targets, they tell stories. They paint pictures of what's possible. Their language lifts others because it's rooted in hope, not fear. They don't manipulate, they inspire. They don't rely on pressure, they rely on purpose. So if you want to think and talk like a winner, stop asking, what's my goal? And start asking, what's my vision? What do you see that others don't yet see? What kind of future do you believe is worth building, even when it's hard? And how can you speak in a way that helps others believe in that future with you? That's what makes the difference. The world doesn't need more goal setters. It needs more visionaries. It needs more people who speak not just about numbers and achievements, but about dreams and change. People who speak with fire in their eyes and clarity in their voice. Because when you speak with vision, your words don't just describe what's next, they create it. There's something winners understand that most people overlook. They understand that success is not a straight line. It's not a checklist. It's not a neatly wrapped journey with predictable outcomes. And because of that, they think differently. They think long-term, even when they're living in the middle of short-term setbacks. We live in a world obsessed with speed. Immediate results, quick wins. Everyone wants to get somewhere fast. But winners, real winners, don't think like sprinters. They think like gardeners. They plant, water, nurture, wait, adjust, and stay committed to the process long before they ever see results. Their thinking is rooted in patience. Their conversations are filled with perspective. I once spoke with an Olympic athlete who had been training for nearly 12 years before she even made it to her first international competition. 12 years of early mornings, failures, injuries, doubt, and discipline. She said something that stuck with me. People see the medals, but I fell more times than I finished. I kept going because I knew that every setback was still part of the story. That's the mindset. That's the language of someone who sees beyond the moment. Most people hit a wall and start questioning everything. Winners hit the same wall, but they ask different questions. They don't ask, why is this happening to me? They ask, what is this teaching me? They don't say, this isn't working. They say, this is part of the work. That mental shift changes everything, because now the challenge isn't a sign to quit, it's a signal to adjust. It's part of the terrain, not the end of the road. I remember a young entrepreneur named Kevin who launched a product that completely flopped. No sales, no traction, nothing like what he expected. Most people would have folded. Instead, Kevin sat down with his team and said, let's study what didn't work. Not to blame, but to learn. Let's fail forward. That phrase, fail forward, changed the culture of his company. It gave his people permission to take risks. Within a year, they'd pivoted, rebranded, and relaunched. The second version exploded. But the victory wasn't the launch. It was how they handled the failure. That's long-term thinking in real time. You can tell a lot about someone by how they talk about failure. People who think like winners don't sugarcoat it. They don't pretend it didn't hurt, but they don't let it define them either. And their language doesn't sound like defeat, it sounds like growth. They use phrases like, that was a turning point, or that experience sharpened me. They see failure as feedback, they see pain as preparation, and most of all, they understand that winning isn't about always being right, it's about never stopping the pursuit of something meaningful. When you listen to someone with this mindset, their words carry depth. They don't just celebrate outcomes, they talk about process. They don't just talk about what they've achieved, they talk about how they kept going when no one was watching. There's a quiet strength in that, a humility, a focus that can't be faked. There was a teacher I met once in a struggling school district, low budgets, high stress, constant turnover. He'd been teaching there for 20 years. I asked him how he kept going when so much seemed broken. He smiled and said, because I don't teach for the test, I teach for the decade. He went on to explain that his mission wasn't just to help students pass exams. It was to help them become adults who knew they mattered. That kind of thinking, That's long-term. That's someone who isn't driven by applause, but by impact. And that's the secret. When you think long-term, your definition of winning changes. It's no longer about outperforming others. It's about outlasting fear. It's about staying true to your values, even when it would be easier to cut corners. It's about building something that lasts, not just something that looks good today. And when that's how you think, that's how you speak. Winners talk about legacy, not just leverage. They speak about principles, not just profits. They talk about building people, not just products. Their language isn't focused on what's urgent. It's focused on what's important. And that difference creates trust. People know when your words come from a deeper place. They can sense when your motivation is anchored to something beyond yourself. It's tempting to chase speed, to want it all now, to compare your timeline to someone else's highlight reel. But winners don't do that. They measure success differently, not by how fast they arrive, but by how faithfully they endure. They know that anything worth building takes time, and they speak from that place, calm, steady, resilient. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. When you think and talk like a winner, you create a culture around you, a space where failure doesn't have to be fatal, where progress isn't just measured in numbers, but in growth, integrity, and consistency. So the question is, what kind of thinker are you when things aren't going well? What kind of words do you choose when the results haven't shown up yet? Are you reacting, or are you reaffirming your value? Are you judging your success by what happened this week, or by who you're becoming over the years? The people who win in the long run don't always look like winners in the moment. They're often the quiet ones. The ones still showing up when others have moved on, the ones still learning, still building, still believing, even when the spotlight is gone, because they know that greatness is never rushed. It's revealed in the way you carry yourself through the in-between. That's how winners think. That's how they talk. Not with arrogance, but with endurance. Not with quick answers, but with lasting purpose. And the best part? That mindset is available to anyone. You don't need a title to think long term. You don't need permission to speak with perspective. You just need to believe that the process matters as much as the prize, and to speak like someone who's already on the way, even if no one else can see it yet. Because the moment you start thinking beyond the moment, you're already winning. One of the most overlooked traits of winners isn't strength. It's not intelligence or charisma or even discipline. It's consistency. The people who win again and again, over months, over years, over decades, don't always have the loudest voices or the boldest moves. What they do have is the ability to keep showing up. When it's hard, when it's boring, when no one else is watching, they've learned that greatness isn't created in bursts, it's built in rhythm. I once visited a friend who runs a small bakery tucked in a quiet neighborhood. It opens at 5:30 a.m. every day. And he's there before the sun rises. He's not trying to go viral or open a chain of franchises, but every day, people line up before the door opens. Not because he's the only one who can make good bread, but because he's the one they trust will be there. Always. His product is great, yes, but it's the consistency that's earned loyalty. He shows up. Rain or shine. That's what winners do. We live in a culture that celebrates intensity, the grand gestures, the dramatic turnarounds, the viral moments. But the truth is, winners are built in the quiet, in the repetition, in the decisions that no one sees. They don't rely on motivation, they rely on habits. They don't just promise, they prove over and over again. And that shows up in how they talk. There's a steadiness in their language. They don't make big declarations for the sake of sounding confident. They don't overpromise. They speak with alignment. They talk about progress, not perfection. Effort, not excuses. There's a tone of groundedness, not drama. You hear it in the way they describe their process. I keep chipping away at it. We're building something strong and steady. Every day matters. That's how winners think. And that's how they speak. I met a young leader recently who had just taken over a struggling team at her company. She wasn't the loudest in the room. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but her people trusted her. I asked her what she thought made the difference. She said, "They know I'll do what I say every time." That was it. Not big speeches, not shiny presentations, just follow through. Her team didn't need her to be perfect. They needed her to be present. That's the power of consistency. It's easy to show up when you feel inspired. It's easy to commit when things are going well. But winners don't wait for conditions to be perfect. They make showing up part of who they are. It becomes identity. It's not a decision every day. It's already decided. And that commitment becomes a message. It tells the people around you, you can count on me. This tells your own mind, I follow through. And over time, that becomes your reputation, your edge, your foundation. Think about a relationship. What builds trust? It's not one grand romantic gesture every few months. It's the little things. The call when you said you'd call. The attention. The presence. The reliability. The same is true in leadership, in business, in life. Consistency is what people lean on when everything else feels uncertain. And when you speak from that place of commitment, of rhythm, of steadiness, your words carry more weight. People listen because they know your talk is backed by your walk. There's a story I often remember about a musician who practiced for 5 hours a day, every day without fail. Not just when he had a concert coming up, not just when he felt inspired. Every day. When someone asked him how he stayed motivated, he replied, "I'm not always motivated, but I'm always devoted." That's the difference. Winners build systems so they don't have to rely on feeling ready. They create consistency so that even when the spark isn't there, the fire doesn't die out. And it's not just about external discipline, it's about internal alignment. People who are consistent in their actions tend to be consistent in their words. They don't change their values to fit the room. They don't tell one story here and a different one there. They're centered, clear, reliable. There's a peace in that, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be performed. Sometimes people mistake consistency for mediocrity, but it's the opposite. Consistency is a form of excellence because it means you care enough to keep doing it well even when no one's clapping. Even when it's tedious, even when you don't feel like it. And that kind of commitment, that kind of discipline becomes your strength when others get tired, distracted, or disillusioned. You'll notice that people who think like winners rarely talk about being on a streak or on a roll because they're not driven by temporary highs, they're anchored. When something goes well, they're grateful, but not overly attached. When something goes wrong, they adjust, but they don't unravel. That balance, that emotional and mental steadiness, it's earned through repetition, through consistent practice, through the daily choice to keep going. I once asked a seasoned CEO what the secret was to her 30-year career. She didn't say strategy, she didn't say innovation. She said, "I just never stopped caring. And I never stopped showing up." That's it. And it's enough. Because that kind of consistency builds momentum. Momentum builds trust. And trust builds influence that lasts. If you want to think and talk like a winner, don't just ask yourself what big move you're going to make next. Ask yourself what small move you're willing to make again and again and again. Are you willing to be the person who follows through? Are you willing to stay steady when others get distracted? Are you willing to build a reputation, not for flair, but for faithfulness? Because in the end, people may remember your high points, but they'll trust your pattern. And that's what matters. Winners don't win because of one great day. They win because of thousands of unseen, uncelebrated days where they chose to show up, do the work, keep the promise, speak the truth, and build the habit. That's how they win. And that's how you can too. Winners understand something most people don't. Words are not just tools, they are signals. Every time you speak, you're broadcasting how you see the world, how you think, what you believe, and where you're going. And more importantly, whether or not others want to go there with you. Language creates culture. It builds momentum or kills it. It brings people together or quietly drives them apart. When winners talk, there's something in their tone, in their choice of words, in their clarity that makes others lean in. It's not magic, it's alignment. Their words match their mindset. Their talk reflects their truth. A few years ago, I worked with a senior leader who inherited a toxic culture. The team was talented, but worn out, disconnected, and demoralized. In his first meeting with the department, he didn't use flashy slides or rehearse a motivational speech. He stood up and said, "I know this team has been burned before. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending one conversation will change everything. But here's what I promise. I will show up with honesty, and I will earn your trust one day at a time." That was it. That kind of language doesn't demand belief. It earns it. That's what winners do. The people we choose to follow aren't always the smartest or most charismatic. Often they're the ones who speak with clarity and conviction. They don't perform. They don't hide behind jargon. They don't sell hype. They speak with intention. They choose words that align with their values and their vision. And that trust they build, word by word, becomes their leadership capital. You can tell a lot about someone by the language they use when things go wrong. Do they blame? Do they deflect? Or do they take ownership? One of the clearest signs of a winning mindset is responsibility. Not perfection, not control, responsibility. Winners say things like, "Here's where I fell short," or "This is on me and I'll make it right." That kind of language doesn't weaken trust. It strengthens it. It shows maturity, humility, and courage. A young athlete once told me, "I used to talk about how everyone else was holding me back, my coach, the system, the politics, but the moment I changed my language to what can I do better, everything shifted. I went from powerless to empowered." That shift in language changed the direction of his career, because when you change your words, you change your story. People with a winning mindset use language to elevate, not to impress. They ask more than they assert. They listen more than they preach. They speak not to sound important, but to connect, to clarify, to call others into something greater. They understand that leadership isn't volume, it's resonance. And resonance only happens when people feel seen, heard, and understood. Think about the people you admire. What do they sound like when they speak? They probably don't throw around big words to prove how smart they are. They probably don't talk in circles to hide uncertainty. Instead, they speak plainly, honestly, purposefully. And that simplicity isn't weakness, it's strength. It tells you they know who they are and they're not trying to be anything else. Language, when used well, doesn't just communicate, it activates. It's the difference between saying, "I hope we make progress," and "we will make progress." Between "I think we're good enough" and "we are capable of more." Winners don't use language to hedge. They use it to build belief. They understand that people rise to the level of the words they hear most often. So they choose those words carefully. There's a restaurant owner I once met whose staff was known for being one of the most engaged teams in the city. Turnover was low, energy was high, the food was good, but the culture was better. When I asked him how he built such loyalty, he said, "I never say my business. I say our place. I don't say employees, I say my team." That might sound small, but words like that, spoken consistently, shape identity. They build a sense of shared ownership. They signal belonging. And that's what language can do. It can pull people in. It can remind them of who they are. It can anchor them to something bigger than the task in front of them. But only if we speak with purpose. The mistake many people make is thinking that communication is about talking more. It's not. It's about being intentional with every word. Winners know that confidence isn't loud, it's clear. Authority isn't about tone, it's about alignment. Influence isn't about persuasion, it's about truth. You don't have to be a professional speaker to speak like a winner. You just have to be willing to say what you mean what you say, and stay true to what you believe. Even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. And when you do that, when your words reflect your principles, your purpose, and your direction, people notice. Because clarity is magnetic. Truth is rare. And in a world full of noise, the calm voice of someone who knows who they are and what they stand for cuts through like nothing else. So ask yourself, what do your words reveal about you? Are they reactive or intentional? Are they vague or focused? Do they reflect fear or conviction? Do they pull others closer or push them away? When you think like a winner, your language becomes an extension of your mindset. You don't need to pretend, you don't need to overcompensate. You speak from a place of alignment, and people feel it. And maybe the most powerful part is this: the way you talk to yourself sets the tone for how you talk to everyone else. Winners are careful with their inner voice. They don't allow negativity to take root. They interrupt doubt with truth. They replace "I can't" with "I'm learning." They speak to themselves the way they'd speak to someone they believe in, and that self-respect echoes into every room they enter. How you talk publicly, privately, to others, to yourself, isn't just about communication. It's about leadership. It's about identity. And most of all, it's about intention. Because when you speak like a winner, you don't just change how people hear you, you change how they see what's possible.